Greetings, Earthlings! Welcome to the part 2 of our lesson entitled What is the Brain? In the first part of this lesson, we've talked about how the brain evolved, and then we talked about the elements of a basic brain. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the thalamus and the rest of the limbic system, as well as the cerebrum and its functions. So, now, while many simpler animals had sensory organs of some kind, reacting to light or vibrations or changes in the chemical composition of the fluid they were living in, some began to develop more sophisticated perception and evolved brain structures to deal with it. For example, there is a large area of packed cells above the midbrain and below the cerebrum known as the thalamus. So, it is separated into two halves, and it acts as a kind of relay station for sensory information and for motor signals going to the muscles. Now, the thalamus receives information from the sensory nerves and from our eyes and ears, and does a certain amount of decoding of those signals before passing the information onto the cerebrum. It also receives the instruction about movement passed down from the cerebrum and sends those instructions to our muscles. Like several other subcortical structures, it is also involved in sleep and wakefulness as well. Those states seem to affect large areas of the brain in general ways rather than being tightly controlled by just one area. Now, there are a number of other small structures around the thalamus. Collectively, these structures are known as the limbic system. A small lump immediately below the thalamus is known as the hypothalamus. It is especially important to mammals because it regulates body temperatures. It has the ability to keep our internal body temperature constant that allows us to be active at night and in cold places. It is also the reason why small mammals can live in underground burrows, which is a possible explanation for how they were able to survive the massive impact that destroyed the dinosaurs. Now, the hypothalamus does more than just regulating temperature. It maintains homeostasis throughout the body. Maintaining homeostasis means keeping everything in steady, comfortable condition. So, if your body fluid levels fall below what is optimal for your survival, the hypothalamus will initiate feelings of thirst, leading you to drink. If your body, let's say, if your body's blood glucose level falls below a certain level, it will initiate hunger, leading you to seek food. If you get too cold, for example, it initiates shivering, which agitates your muscles to generate a little heat. And if you get too warm, it initiates sweating so that the evaporation will cool you down. Now, effectively, the hypothalamus acts as a regulator to keep the body's basic mechanisms working as they should. It is positioned just below the thalamus, which gives out its name. Hypo means below. Allows it to have connections with all the early parts of the brain, so it can send the relevant signals when they are needed. The hypothalamus sends its signals partly by nerve cell connections, but partly also by releasing hormones. Now, hormones are chemicals that either stimulate body processes or cause other hormones to be released by other glands in the body. Hormones are particularly important for maintaining states such as growth, pregnancy, arousal, or anxiety. Together, the hormone-releasing glands from the endocrine system of the body and the hypothalamus is the brain's main route for connecting the brain with the endocrine system. There are many other parts of the limbic system too. The hippocampus is a small curved structure underneath the cerebrum, and its name comes from the way it was thought to resemble the shape of a seahorse. It's important in memory in several ways. One is that it allows us to consolidate our memories into long-term memory storage. People with damage into to the hippocampus, like that caused by frequent drinking alcohol without eating, can find that they become unable to store new memories. This is known as the Korsakoff syndrome, and it can have tragic consequences. Now, the hippocampus is concerned with other forms of memories as well. For example, our spatial memory, which is how we remember where we are and the location that we know. London taxi drivers who have to memorize virtually the whole of London in order to pass the test known as the knowledge have shown an increase in the size of the hippocampus as a result of their increased spatial memory. So that when so this means that what we do in life can either damage how our brain works or improve it. It's all about the choices that we make. However, from the evolutionary perspective though, we can see how the ability to navigate around an area and to develop mental maps can help an animal to survive. Studies have shown, for instance, that mice allowed to explore a complex maze with no escape routes will freeze if a cat is then introduced to the area, while mice that haven't had a chance to explore will run about looking for an escape. By exploring and remembering, the first set of mice discovers that escape isn't possible. So staying very still to avoid attention is a better option for them. Incidentally, we do not know whether the cat was allowed to catch the mice in these studies or what happened to them in the end. In the period when they were conducted in the 1960s, little consideration was given to animal ethics. So the mice might or might not have survived. We wouldn't do a study like this nowadays, fortunately for the mice. But it doesn't change the main point of the studies, which is that knowing all about your location is a definite aid to survival. Now, another important part of the limbic system is the amygdala. This is the emotion center of the brain, and it consists of two almond-shaped structures located deep in the right and left temporal lobes, which we will be talking about later, quite close to the hippocampus. It helps the brain to identify and reacts to threats, and is active in our other emotions too, both positive and negative ones. Part of its role appeared to be working with the hippocampus to consolidate memories, especially memories with especially emotionally charged ones. We are more prepared to remember things if they accompany an intense emotional experience, and this is partly the result of activity in the amygdala. So, other parts of the limbic system includes the basal ganglia, which is the name given to a group of cells nested deep in the white matter of the frontal lobes. These cells help us organize our movements by choosing appropriate actions and inhibiting our actions until we know that they are suitable for the situation. Now, the basal ganglia also include the caudate nuclei, which are also involved in planning actions and in coordinating the learning of habits and rule-based actions. And the area known as the globus pallidus, which is also about regulating deliberate movements so that it is coordinated and fluid. As you might have expected then, the basal ganglia have close links with the cerebellum, and damage to any of these areas can produce problems with movements of one or another. So the cingulate gyrus or cingulate cortex is a large area of the brain just above the corpus callosum. Although it is continuous, with the cerebrum itself, it's often considered to belong to the limbic system, partly because of its connections and the way it works so closely with other parts of the system. Like the hypothalamus and the amygdala, it is involved in emotion, memory, and learning, among other functions. For example, it coordinates smell and sight with pleasant or unpleasant memories. It also seems to be involved in regulating aggressive behavior, and it is active in the neural pathways that are stimulated by our emotional reactions. Now, the limbic system then is intensely involved in movements, all of which are important for animals like mammals, which need to be able to survive in a complex world. Other animals such as reptiles, fish, and amphibians also possess these structures, but we are not as clear about the precise roles they play. Our understanding of mammals in terms of emotions and their learning mechanisms is better developed, partly because it helps us to understand our own nervous system, or how our own nervous system has developed. Now, you might be wondering why human brain has so many folds and grooves. Information is processed on the outer layer of the cerebrum, what we call the cerebral cortex. So, in some animals like birds or reptiles, this outer surface is relatively smooth, and the cerebrum itself is not particularly large. In mammals, however, the cerebrum is bigger with creases and grooves which increase its surface area. Now, the cerebrum is the largest part of a dog or a cat's brain, and it has several deep folds. A monkey's cerebrum is much larger than that of a cat's relative to the rest of its body, and has many more folds and grooves. Apes have even more. By the time we reach humans, the cerebrum covers almost all of the rest of the brain, and its surface has become even more convoluted, with parts which can't even be seen from the outside because they are folded right underneath. This actually fits neatly with our ideas about human beings more intelligent than other animals, until we look into whales and dolphins, which have even more folds and grooves in the surface of their cerebrum than human beings, than the brains of human beings. So, does this mean they are more intelligent than us? Nobody knows, except possibly the cetaceans, and they are not actually telling us. So, finally, we are moving upwards through the brain, or onwards through our evolutionary progress. We come to the cerebrum. This is the largest structure of all in mammals, and especially in humans, and as mentioned earlier, dolphins and whales. It is by far the most important part of the brain in human beings, and most of the videos in this series will be dealing with different aspects of our cerebral functioning. For now, however, it is worth taking a look at its basic structure so that we can find our way around its different areas and sections. Now, the cerebrum is what makes us human. It is the part of the brain that does thinking, perceiving, of cognitive and social understanding that we use without even being aware of it. So, it's not surprising that it overshadows all other structures of the brain. It isn't separate from them if you think about it. The surface of the cerebrum is composed of gray matter, and it consists of cell bodies of neurons and the other cells which support them. Now, the cerebrum itself is divided into two halves, a bit like a giant walnut if you think about it. Now, the two halves are the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. They are largely separate, but they have a crossover. A thick band known as the corpus callosum connects these two separate halves. This is a mass of nerve fibers which pass messages from one side of the brain to the other side of the brain to coordinate our actions and our cognitions. We need this because the two halves work together but have slightly different functions. In general, the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side of the body, while the right cerebral hemisphere controls the left side of the body. The two cerebral hemispheres are physically very similar in structure, so the way that we name different areas is the same for both sides of the brain. The surface, as we have seen, is covered with deep grooves with rounded areas between them. Each groove is known as a sulcus, and the mound between the grooves is known as a gyrus. Now, the plurals of this are sulci and gyri in case that in the future we will encounter them. Now, the deep sulcus which divides the two halves of the cerebrum is known as the medial sulcus. While the medial sulcus is the dividing line between the left and right cerebral hemisphere, it doesn't separate them entirely. As we have seen, they are joined by the corpus callosum, but the joint is so deeply buried between the two that it cannot be seen from the surface. On each hemisphere are two particularly long and deep sulci. This divide each cerebral hemisphere into four lobes. The lateral sulcus, sometimes also called the lateral fissure, runs along the side of the brain, and the area of the brain is called the temporal lobe, as seen in this image. It has many functions, and one of its distinctive one is in processing the sound that we hear. The other major sulcus is the central sulcus or central fissure, which runs across the top of the brain, and this separates the front part of the brain known as the frontal lobe. This is the area behind. It separates the front part of the brain known as the frontal lobe from the area behind it, which is known as the parietal lobe. The frontal lobe is particularly concerned with decision making, planning, and movement, while the parietal lobe integrates various kinds of sensory information. The fourth lobe of the brain, the occipital lobe, is not defined by a sulcus as the other three are, but it is the area at the very back of our brains, and it is distinctively concerned with vision. Some of the most interesting parts of the cerebrum, though, are tucked right underneath the lobes, where they fold into themselves. For example, under the cerebrum, but still part of it, is a thin but widespread layer of cells that links together many different areas of the cerebral cortex and connects them with many of the structures in the limbic system. This is called the claustrum, which some researchers believe is crucial to consciousness and what we experience as our connected awareness. Then there is the insula, an area of the cortex folded deep and inside the lateral fissure. This too is involved in consciousness and also with social perceptions such as empathy, compassion, self-awareness, and emotional experiences. Not only that, but the insula has strong connections with our systems for control of movement and cognition. That is, if you think about it, thinking and memory. So, the brain then is a complex structure, and exploring how it works and how it is different. How its different structures connect with one another is one of the most exciting aspects of modern science. Since neuroscientists are making new discoveries all the time, we are unable to cover them all here. But I hope this video will but in the coming weeks, this video will describe enough of them for you to get an idea of what is where and how your brain makes you into a person you are. Now, the brain began as an extension of a simple tube linking a primitive nervous system. It became increasingly complex as animal evolved. The parts of the brain closest to the spinal cord deals with essential life-maintaining processes like breathing, heartbeat, digestion, and alertness. Larger subcortical structures include the thalamus and the cerebellum. Now, the thalamus coordinates sensory information while the cerebellum coordinates movement. The limbic system is a collection of small structures that include the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the basal ganglia, which are important in emotions, memory, and learning. The largest part of the human brain is the cerebrum, which is divided into two halves that cover almost all of the rest of the brain and are wrinkled and folded to increase its surface area. In this video, we've looked more closely at how or rather in the coming video, we will look more closely at how the different parts of the brain works and what brain studies and brain scanning reveal. Again, this has been Dex Kamitan, and thank you for watching.